I remember the street first, slick with rain, the kind of night that turns every lamp into a halo. I was rushing because rushing always felt safer than standing still. That was the moment a question rose from the quiet behind me, simple, steady, like a lighthouse cutting through fog. "Are you okay?" The words were not a demand. They were a blanket. I turned, and there was the face I would learn by heart. Eyes that did not search for flaws or opportunities but for truth, for presence. I answered with a shrug that meant I'm fine and a smile that meant I'm not. Somehow, the smile told the truth louder than the shrug ever could. We walked without planning to. The city hummed like a living thing, and I let the hum tuck me into the space beside that warm voice. The conversation started with weather and drifted to childhood recipes and the strange comfort of grocery store aisles at midnight. There was nothing rushed, nothing performed. Everything felt like breathing after holding it too long. When laughter came, it surprised me. It sounded brighter than the traffic, brighter than the windows, like a bell rung for the first time in years. At a crosswalk, the world paused in red, and a palm lifted. Wait. That single word secured me to the sidewalk, and I loved the care of it, the pause that held no pressure. For once I wasn't required to be impressive or unbreakable. I only had to be. The rain softened into a mist that kissed my cheeks, and I realized the ache that had been living behind my ribs wasn't just loneliness. It was the fatigue of being unseen. Standing in that small pool of attention, I felt looked at without being judged, like a story worth hearing rather than a problem to be solved. We found a cafe still open, a tiny place with fogged windows and a jukebox that favored old songs with harmonies like warm honey. I wrapped fingers around a chipped mug and watched steam climb. Questions came gently. What keeps you up at night? What dream sits behind your eyes when you stare out the window too long? No one had asked like that before. Curious but not invasive, patient but not detached. I answered before fear could censor me, the words tumbling out like marbles escaping a jar. I spoke about the way independence had become a fortress, how doors I once left open were now double-bolted from the inside. The reply was soft. Fortresses are strong until they make you lonely. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic confession. Just a presence that held the room like a steady hand holds a kite string. When the barista flipped chairs onto tables, we stepped back into the night. The rain had stopped. The street smelled like new beginnings. I felt a delicate flutter in my chest, a first spark that could vanish if I stared too hard. We walked to the corner where our paths split, and I waited for the usual awkward exchange. Instead, there was a simple offer. "If you'd like, I can walk you to your stop." No expectations. The honesty of it, the clean edge, no games, no agenda, moved something stubborn inside me. I said yes. Under the dim glow of the bus shelter, silence shared space with us the way close friends do. Comfortable, unafraid. I caught my reflection in the plexiglass. Tired, hopeful, surprised to find both in the same face. When the bus sighed to a stop, a smile reached me with unhurried certainty. "You look like the sky when it's about to clear." I carried that sentence home like a secret flame cupped between hands. And for the first time in a long time, I did not rush to blow it out. The days that followed slipped into a rhythm so tender it felt invented just for us. Messages arrived like small lanterns. Nothing grand, just a photo of a morning sky, a question about lunch, a confession about a song stuck on repeat. Each one drew me closer without tugging. I noticed how attention lingered, not on the drama of the world, but on the hush between our words, as if that hush was where truth waited patiently to be invited in. We started walking the long way home, choosing detours lined with jacaranda trees and cracked sidewalks where weeds made brave decisions. That's how trust grew, not through declarations, but through the ordinary, sharing fries on a curb, laughing at a street performer who forgot the trick halfway through, waiting for a stubborn crosswalk that refused to change. I kept catching my reflection in shop windows, lighter somehow. I had not been lighter in years, and yet there I was, smiling like the city belonged to me and I belonged to the city because I belonged beside someone who treated time like a gift, not a transaction. Late nights became our classroom. On a sofa that had seen better springs, we explored the archive of simple questions that people often skip. What do you want to be forgiven for? What feels like home when no one is watching? I answered without rehearsal. Sometimes my voice trembled. Sometimes laughter pushed tears to the rim. I noticed how carefully silence was handled, never as punishment, always as permission. When words nodded, a look would unspool them. When fear tried to interrupt, a hand on my shoulder would say quietly, "Not today." There were evenings when closeness hummed through the room like a low, warm chord. We moved with a softness that respected what had been bruised. Fingers met at the edge of a blanket. A forehead leaned into a palm. Breath slowed until it matched, two metronomes agreeing on a tempo neither had practiced before. The ache of wanting felt clean, not desperate, like standing at the shoreline and understanding the moon is guiding the tide. I learned that desire could be reverent, that tenderness could be fierce, that intimacy, when truly seen, is not a performance but a prayer. We cooked small meals that tasted bigger in company. Burnt toast got buttered anyway. Overcooked pasta earned a laugh and a splash of extra sauce, a reminder that perfection is brittle and we preferred things that bend. While chopping tomatoes, I told the story of the year I mistook self-protection for strength. The reply wasn't advice or a fix. It was a quiet, steady sentence. You don't have to earn gentleness. The words landed like rain on a droughted field. Something in me softened and drank. One night, the power went out on our block. Candles were found, their shy light turning the room into a small cathedral. We read notes from old books and guessed the shapes of constellations through the window. The city, usually loud, exhaled. With the world dim to silhouettes, I realized how safe I felt. Not the brittle safety that depends on locked doors and rigid rules, but the living safety that grows from consistent kindness. We made a promise without wrapping it in ceremony. To be clear when we needed space, to meet hard days with soft hands, to keep choosing honesty even when it shook. When the lights returned, I could have sworn the room glowed a fraction brighter. We didn't rush to fill the moment. We let it hold. In that pause, something essential named itself, gravity. Not the dramatic pull of fireworks, but the faithful tug of a star that refuses to let you drift into cold distances. I had been in orbit without a center for so long. Now the center found me, and the path I traced around it felt both brand new and deeply remembered, like a melody I must have heard in childhood and finally recognized. There comes a point when comfort turns into courage, the kind that whispers, "It's time." That's how it felt one night when laughter dissolved into quiet and quiet revealed the tremor beneath it. The stories I used to hide started knocking. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple and heavy at once. A question was asked and I couldn't dodge it. What hurt you most before I met you? The room stilled. I felt the old reflex. Change the subject, smile, minimize. But those eyes held space, not scrutiny, and the space was large enough for truth to stretch its sore limbs. So I told pieces, slowly, as though unwrapping glass. The heartbreak that left splinters, the promises that turned conditional, the times affection felt like a test I always failed. I confessed how I had learned to love halfway, enough to seem open, but never enough to be broken again. The words shook. Hands were clasped together, not to quiet me, but to anchor me. There was no fixing, only listening, and in that listening something rewired. Every tremble was met with stillness, not pity. Every scar was named, not analyzed. The naming itself felt like cleansing, like airing out rooms that had been locked too long. In return, stories were shared too. Stories of mistakes, of guilt, of nights spent chasing noise to drown out silence. We didn't compete in pain. We compared survival notes. I realized then that love is not the opposite of hurt. It's the opposite of hiding. For the first time, I didn't have to perform resilience. I could be soft and still be seen as strong. I could speak of fear and not lose respect. That kind of safety changes the shape of a person. It changed mine. There were nights when memory ambushed me. A tone, a phrase, the way a door closed too fast. It would pull me back to old panic. But there was always a hand reaching before I fell too far. "Come back," the voice would say, not commanding, just reminding. And I would, slowly. We learned how to trace shadows without letting them own us. Sometimes that meant stepping back, giving space, breathing through the echoes. Sometimes it meant holding tight until shaking turned to sighing. Healing didn't arrive like sunrise. It arrived like dawn seen through fog, faint, patient, inevitable. I began to understand that intimacy isn't built in grand declarations or perfect days. It's built in moments like these, the late-night tears, the clumsy apologies, the laughter that sneaks back after silence. I stopped fearing my past the day I realized it no longer dictated my future, and I owed that realization to the way I was loved, without pressure to be healed, without shame for being in progress. One evening, while lying under a sky blurred with half-moons and thin clouds, a whisper slipped out of me before I knew it was forming. "I don't feel broken anymore." The reply came with a smile I could hear even in the dark. "That's because you never were. You were just waiting for the right light." I turned and looked, and in that gaze, everything painful softened into something sacred. It wasn't magic. It was presence. And it was enough. Love was steady until life got loud. Deadlines multiplied, phone screens replaced faces, and nights ended before words could finish. The rhythm we built began to stutter. I felt the pull of distance, not the physical kind, but the quiet one that grows when two people forget to listen. He noticed before I did. "We're drifting," he said softly, as if naming it could keep it from spreading. I wanted to deny it, to wrap us back in the glow of early days, but pretending would be poison. We had to relearn the dance of showing up. So we did, slowly. Texts became check-ins, not just logistics. Calls turned into small rituals of truth-telling. "How's your heart?" replaced "How's your day?" The question disarmed me every time. Some days, I snapped, work bled into mood and I'd retreat behind tired eyes. Yet instead of withdrawing, he stayed near, not crowding, just close enough to remind me that care doesn't vanish when energy does. He'd drop off coffee at my doorstep with notes that said, "You don't have to sparkle to be loved." Those words sank deep. I'd read them between meetings, the ache in my chest easing each time. One evening we argued, not dramatic, just sharp enough to sting. Misunderstandings layered like fog. My instinct was escape, but then his voice quieter than breath. "Don't run. Let's stay through the noise." So we stayed. We talked past midnight until anger thinned into understanding. It wasn't perfect. It was human. And human love, I was learning, is resilient. The next morning, sunlight caught the edges of our exhaustion and turned it golden. He reached for my hand. "We'll have hard days," he said. "Let's meet them instead of fearing them." It sounded simple, but in that simplicity was a vow stronger than any promise of forever. From then on, every small act mattered. Every shared meal, every tired smile, every apology whispered in traffic. We weren't just in love. We were practicing it. I began to see love not as a feeling, but as a discipline, a daily decision to listen, to forgive, to stay curious about the person beside me even when comfort tempted complacency. Nights returned to laughter. Not the wild, early kind, but the quiet laughter of people who've seen each other's storms and still choose joy. Sometimes he'd trace constellations on my palm, connecting freckles like stars. "You're still my sky," he'd say. And I'd believe it, not because of poetry, but because every small gesture had built a galaxy between us. We had learned how to hold on, not by gripping tightly, but by opening wide enough for both of us to breathe. That's what saved us, not perfection, not passion alone, but the steady, deliberate art of choosing to orbit the same sun, even when clouds made it hard to see. That's when I realized real love doesn't silence the world. It teaches you how to stay heard within its noise. It began with something small, the way most endings do. A message left unread, a tone mistaken for indifference. I was tired, he was distant, and silence filled the spaces where warmth used to live. It wasn't anger that hurt most. It was absence. The feeling that someone who once memorized your heartbeat now hesitates before calling your name. I told myself it was nothing, that every love story has its dip, but doubt grew like mold in the corners of my thoughts. One evening, a rumor reached me through someone who didn't know they were carrying dynamite. "He's been spending time with someone from work," they said, casual, careless. The words detonated quietly. I smiled, pretended calm, but inside the ground tilted. That night, I scrolled through his messages, not to find proof, but to find peace. I found neither. Just fragments, short replies, delayed responses, and the haunting space between them. When we met, I couldn't hold it in. My voice trembled, edged with accusation I didn't want to own. "Is there something you're not telling me?" He blinked, confusion first, then pain. "You think I'd do that?" The room felt too small for the storm I'd unleashed. "I don't know what to think," I whispered, which was truer than I wanted to admit. We argued in circles, both trying to defend what we couldn't define. He left before dawn, the door closing like a final line in a poem we hadn't finished. Days passed like slow rain. Everything I touched reminded me of him: the mug, the playlist, the scent that lingered in my scarf. I told myself to let go, that if it were real, it wouldn't need holding. But love doesn't obey logic. It lingers in the bones. Nights became my punishment. I replayed every moment, every missed cue, every word that could have been softer. Guilt joined jealousy, and together they built a cage. I wanted to call, to explain, but pride stood guard. I imagined him moving on, laughing in new rooms, forgetting my voice. The thought hollowed me. Then a message came, a simple, cautious line: "Can we talk?" My pulse betrayed me. We met at the same cafe where everything began. He looked thinner, quieter, but his eyes still carried that impossible gentleness. "You stopped trusting me," he said, not accusing, just stating a truth that hurt because it was fair. I swallowed tears. I trusted my fear more than I trusted your heart. The admission broke something open. He reached across the table, fingers trembling. "I never wanted you to doubt where you stand in my world." And I realized I had let the echoes of old wounds speak louder than the person who had never caused them. We sat there, hands clasped, both grieving what insecurity had stolen. There was no grand forgiveness, only a quiet, fragile choosing to try again. Outside, the sky bruised with evening, a single star fighting through the clouds. I looked at it and thought, every eclipse ends. Every light, if true, returns. That night we walked home slower, saying little. But silence, for the first time in weeks, didn't hurt. It healed. We began again like travelers returning to a familiar city, cautious, reverent, aware of every street that once led to silence. This time we spoke before shadows could take shape. We learned to say, "I'm scared," instead of, "I'm fine." We learned that honesty doesn't ruin love. It protects it. Every confession became a bridge, and we crossed them barefoot, step by trembling step. The fear didn't vanish. It simply had nowhere to hide. We gave it names, we met it together, and somehow that made it smaller. Mornings returned to softness. Coffee shared, not in a rush, but as a ceremony. His laughter filled the rooms again, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat the world could set its clock to. When he touched my cheek, I felt the difference, not just affection, but recognition. He didn't love the easy version of me, the one polished for public view. He loved the one who doubted, the one who overthought, the one who sometimes fell apart and still dared to rebuild. I had been searching for perfection my whole life. He taught me devotion lives in imperfection. We started writing letters, not because we needed them, but because words written by hand felt like roots. In one of them he said, "I don't love you for how you shine. I love you for how you stay when it's dark." I folded that sentence into my wallet, carried it everywhere like a talisman. And I learned to stay too. To stay through silence, through routine, through the weight of ordinary days. Love didn't feel like a high anymore. It felt like ground, like something I could build a life on. One evening, we stood beneath the same sky where we first met, stars scattered like forgiveness. The air smelled of wet earth and second chances. He looked at me the way you look at something you almost lost, grateful, careful, infinite. "You know," he said, "you've always been my only star." I smiled. Not because I believed I was singular, but because I finally understood what he meant. I was seen. Fully. And that kind of love, steady, imperfect, true, is the rarest kind of miracle. I rested my head against his chest and listened to the rhythm that had steadied me from the start. I whispered, "Let's never forget how hard we fought for this." He answered, "We won't. We'll keep choosing it." And in that moment, I knew love wasn't a destination. It was a practice, a sacred repetition. Every sunrise, every apology, every small act of kindness was another vow. We weren't stars trying to outshine each other anymore. We were a constellation, separate but connected, drawing light together against the dark. As we walked home hand in hand, the city around us pulsed with quiet beauty. I thought of the first night, of rain and neon reflections, and how everything began with a single question. "Are you okay?" Maybe love is that simple, someone asking, meaning it, and never stopping. If this story found a home in your heart, if it reminded you that real love isn't perfect, but patient, healing, and worth every scar, then let it stay with you a while. Don't just listen, feel, because somewhere out there, someone is learning to love like this too. Gently, honestly, completely. If you felt it, if even one line breathed warmth into your chest, then take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for the idea that love, no matter how bruised, can always find its way back to light.